overhead cost. The cost of any product is normally classified into two main segments, direct and indirect cost. The entire segment of indirect costs is known as overheads, which normally include indirect material, indirect labor, and indirect expenses for the benefit of many cost centers. The indirect cost component is the cost component which cannot be easily or conveniently identified for a particular product and is known as overhead. In general, any expense which is incurred over and above the prime cost of the product is known as overhead. That is, factory overheads, administrative overheads, selling and distribution overheads. These overheads are nothing but indirect expenses at every level, not only for the manufacturer of the products but also for selling and distribution of products in the market. This lesson discusses different methods of overhead costing. It follows from the previous slide that after studying this lesson, you should be able to understand the implementation of overhead cost, explain the various types of overheads, describe the meaning of allocation of overheads, apportionment of overheads and absorption of overheads, know the various tools of absorption of overheads. The hike in the volume of overheads is due to the reasons like due to mechanized large-scale production, due to increase in the efficiency of labor force, which may in turn increase the level of productivity of the organization, due to application of capital-intensive technology rather than labor-intensive technology. More use of mechanized devices leads to incurring great amount of overheads due to greater depreciation, maintenance charges, fuel, oil, power, and so on. The methods of work study paves way for the organization to bring down only the direct cost component of the product but not the overhead. That is why the overhead costing plays a vital role in the costing and management accounting. The overheads can be classified into three major classifications, viz. Function-wise classifications, element-wise classifications, behavior-wise classifications. In function-wise classification, the overheads are classified into various major functions of the organizations. Manufacturing overhead, which consists of all indirect expenses of the manufacturing division of the enterprise. Administrative overhead is an overhead normally incurred by the organization at the moment of carrying out the functions of the organization, like planning, organizing, staffing, directing, controlling, and motivating. Selling overhead, which is normally incurred by the organization to promote the sale among the other competitors as well as to sustain among them and to retain the buyers. Distribution overhead is the category of expenses which regularly arise in between the two stages. Under element-wise classification, the overheads are segregated in accordance with the nature and source of expenditure. This is to be carried out to the tune of principles of overheads. Indirect material includes material cost which cannot be allocated, has to be apportioned or absorbed by cost centers or units, for example, fuel, tools, lubricants, etc. Indirect wages is another type of wage which cannot be allocated, has to be apportioned or absorbed by cost center or units, for example, repair wages, leave pay, idle wages, and so on. Indirect expenses are expenses which cannot be allocated and has to be apportioned or absorbed by cost centers or units. Under behavior-wise classification, the overheads are classified into three major categories based on the behavior, that is, variability. Some overheads are remaining constant unlike others irrespective of the volume of production. The behavior-wise classification is carried out on the basis of following segments, that is fixed, variable, and semi-variable. Fixed overhead expenses which do not vary along with the production means remaining the same nothing but fixed overhead. Variable overhead is subject to variability along with the volume of production. Semi-variable overhead is known in other words as a step overhead and is neither wholly fixed nor variable to the volume of production. Cost apportionment is the allotment of overheads to various cost centers or cost units, which cannot be easily identified exclusively for a particular cost center or cost unit. Principles of apportionment are service or use of benefit accrued, ability to pay method, efficiency method, and survey method. Apportionment of overheads should be carried out on the basis of benefits extracted or used or accrued. The overheads are apportioned on the basis of ability of the departments, that is, ability to earn. The apportionment of overheads is taking place on the basis of efficiency of the departments. It is most important method facilitates the organization to apportion the overheads not on the basis of benefits accrued. The method of overhead absorption could be explained as how to recover the cost from the cost of production. The method of apportionment of overhead expenses to the cost centers or cost units is known as overhead absorption. It is nothing but the process of including the share of overhead expenses of one unit in the charge of total cost of a single unit. In direct material cost method, factory expenses are denominated in terms of materials consumed in production and is calculated as percentage to absorbed material manufacturing overheads. Overhead rate equals to overhead expenses budgeted upon anticipated direct material cost. This method is most suitable for the factories which have greater stability in the price of materials as well as only one product in its product line. This is another easier method to follow is direct labor cost method, which is considered as renowned method of absorbing the overheads in terms of labor. Overhead rate equals to overhead expenses upon direct labor. This method is considered to be more prominent only in the case of organizations which have greater influence of direct labor on the total cost of production. Under prime cost method, the absorption overhead is made through an aggregate of direct materials and direct labor of all products of a cost center. Overhead recovery rate equals to overhead expenses divided by direct material plus direct labor. This method is considered to be the best method among the early two due to nullifying the drawbacks of the prime cost method. The recovery rate of overheads is computed by dividing the overhead expenses by the summation of productive hours of the direct workers. Overhead recovery rate equals to overhead expenses upon direct labor hours. It is a method suitable for the organization which gives greater importance to labor. This method never gives room for the fluctuation in the rate of labor but gives greater importance to the time factor. Machine hour rate method is cost of running a machine per hour and the factory expenses are absorbed through the production. It is most useful for the organization which greatly applies the capital-intensive technology rather than the labor-intensive technology. This method facilitates the organization which mainly relies upon the machines and also incurs overhead expenses due to the operations of the same machines. Rate per unit of production is most suitable to the industries of mining, brick manufacturing, and foundries for calculating the overhead rate. It is mostly adopted in the organizations where only one product is being manufactured. Otherwise, it is not that much meaningful technique to study the overhead rate. The overheads are recovered by dividing overhead expenses by budget production. To understand the importance of ABC, if the firm launches the product without considering the right customers, what will happen? The improper decision of launching either a product or service will lead to mess in the market, which drastically affects the image of the enterprise among the genuine customers. The improper decision of launching of a post-paid cellular service along with 2 cell phones registered a black mark in the history of Reliance Infocom for Rs 500. The initial launch had affected the cost of operation of Reliance Infocom due to improper service to improper customers. Hence, Reliance decided to take a decision to recast the product and also to safeguard the interest of the venture. After applying Six Sigma through DMAIC principle, the defectiveness of the post-paid cellular service was corrected and removed from the product line of the Reliance Infocom through the introduction of prepaid service. The business process re-engineering has affected the introduction of the new prepaid cellular service, which literally considered the cost per activity by replacing the yester methodology of traditional costing. The cost of operations should be able to serve the needs of the customers on time. Another major reason for the prominence of activity-based costing is to consider the cost of the product design. It reduces the cost of production and makes suggestions for the sourcing of an activity. To understand the importance of ABC, if the firm launches the product without considering the right customers, what will happen? The improper decision of launching either a product or service will lead to mess in the market, which drastically affects the image of the enterprise among the genuine customers. The improper decision of launching of a post-paid cellular service along with 2 cell phones registered a black mark in the history of Reliance Infocom for Rs 500. The initial launch had affected the cost of operation of Reliance Infocom due to improper service to improper customers. Hence, Reliance decided to take a decision to recast the product and also to safeguard the interest of the venture. After applying Six Sigma through DMAIC principle, the defectiveness of the post-paid cellular service was corrected and removed from the product line of the Reliance Infocom through the introduction of prepaid service. The business process re-engineering has affected the introduction of the new prepaid cellular service, which literally considered the cost per activity by replacing the yester methodology of traditional costing. The cost of operations should be able to serve the needs of the customers on time. Another major reason for the prominence of activity-based costing is to consider the cost of the product design. It reduces the cost of production and makes suggestions for the sourcing of an activity. The ABC not only enlists the number of activities but also classifies them into 2 categories, that is, primary activity and secondary activity. Primary activity is an activity which directly charges to cost object, which could be classified into 2 different categories in accordance with the nature of the business, that is, product and service. The unit level activities are performed each time a unit of a product is produced. The number of times unit level activities are performed varies according to the number of units produced. The batch level activities are performed each time a batch of goods is produced. The number of times batch level activities are performed varies according to the number of batches made. The cost of these activities can be assigned to individual batches, but they are fixed regardless of the number of units in the batch. Product sustaining activities are performed as needed to support the production of each different type of product. Examples of product sustaining activities are maintaining product specifications, performing engineering change notices, and developing special testing routines. These costs can be assigned to individual products but are not proportional to the number of units or batches produced. Facility sustaining activities support a facility's general manufacturing process. Examples of facility sustaining activities are lighting and cleaning the facility, facility security, and managing the facility. The next segment is nothing but the secondary activity to the cost object. The secondary activity may be classified into 2 general categories, viz. Support activities of the core activities and non-support activities. The Human Resource Department is the only department which mainly extends support to the core activities of manufacturing, that is primary activity. Where ABC is acting as a tool to manage the pool of activity costs known as activity-based management. The ABM is a developed tool which bridges the gap between value provider and value seeker. It facilitates the firm to achieve the desired value addition in the product or service by adopting the systematic analysis. In other words, ABM is characterized by three different analyses, which are cost driver analysis, activity analysis, and performance analysis. Cost driver analysis is only on the basis of causes which normally make the firms to perform the activities. The efficiency and inefficiency of the activity is studied with reference to a particular reason. In activity analysis, the activities are to be studied in the light of value addition. The importance of the activities is to be probed from time to time. In performance analysis, the performance of the activities is to be analyzed only in terms of the goals or objectives of the activity centers only in order to have continuous improvement in the process. The stages involved in the activity-based management are identification and classification of activities of the organization or activity center, assignment of costs to cost pool for each activity, apportioning the support activities across primary activities, determination of the cost driver for each activity, determination of the cost driver rate of the activity, determination of the cost pool of the activity, managing the cost of activities. Now let us check if we have understood the various concepts discussed in this lesson clearly. Absorption means dividing the overhead to the various departments on certain basis. Right or wrong? Wrong. Apportionment means recovery of overheads. Right or wrong? Wrong. Cost driver gives the cause for the incurrence of the cost of an activity. Right or wrong? Right. Before we end, let us briefly revise what we have studied till so far. Due to rapid industrialization, the growth in the volume of overheads surmounted due to mechanization, for which specific overhead accounting and control is required to not only allocate the overheads, but also the overheads of the service departments are apportioned to production departments. The next stage in the process of overheads accounting is absorption of overheads, which has got its own methods. The popular methods of absorption of overheads are direct labor method, prime cost method, labor hours method, and machine hours method. Traditional cost system was unable to price the products successfully to specific needs and demands of the consumers. In order to replace the drawbacks of the traditional cost system, activity-based cost system was introduced. In this methodology, the nature of the activities are to be classified into primary and support activities. The very next step is to identify the cost drivers from the activities in order to assign the cost of the activity of the department, which facilitates the organization to specifically determine the cost of the product righteously as well as exactly.